A puppy won't leave a 6-month-old paralyzed baby's side. But what happened next is a miracle. At first it looks like heartbreak. A helpless baby who can't move, a desperate mother who's losing hope, and a dog that refuses to back away from the crib. No one understands why, until the night the furnace hums, the baby goes still, and the puppy starts to howl like it's warning of something unseen. Every time the heat turns on, the danger grows. Every time the puppy growls, he's fighting something more deadly than anyone realizes. Then, one terrifying night, the truth erupts. And that same puppy does something no one thought possible. Was this just an animal's instinct? Or a miracle that saved a life when no human could? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The January wind rattled the windows of Nadine Kerrigan's small rental house, its mournful whistle piercing through the darkness. She had finally drifted off after another long day of juggling work and single motherhood when something jarred her awake. Mother's instinct, maybe. Or perhaps it was the unusual silence where Pearl's soft breathing should have been. Nadine's feet hit the cold floor before her mind fully registered why. The nightlight cast a dim glow across Pearl's crib, enough to see her 6-month-old daughter lying unnaturally still. Too still. "Pearl!" Nadine's voice cracked as she reached for her baby. Her hands trembled as they met Pearl's tiny body, limp as a rag doll. "No, no, no." Pearl's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, but her arms and legs hung loose when Nadine lifted her. The baby's normally bright gray eyes were half closed, unfocused. "Wake up, sweetie, please wake up." Panic clawed at Nadine's throat as she patted Pearl's cheek. The baby's head lolled against her shoulder. From his bed in the corner, Bauer raised his head, his German shepherd ears pricked forward. The young dog watched intently as Nadine grabbed her coat and Pearl's blanket, wrapping her daughter against the bitter cold. "Stay, Bauer," she commanded, though her voice shook. The dog whined but obeyed, tracking their movement with worried eyes. The drive to the emergency room was a blur of streetlights and terror. Nadine's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles went white, every second stretching like hours. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Pearl's car seat, searching for any sign of movement. "Help! Please! Something's wrong with my baby!" Nadine burst through the ER doors, Pearl clutched to her chest. The fluorescent lights were harsh after the darkness, making everything seem surreal and sharp-edged. The staff sprang into action. A nurse whisked Pearl away, while another guided Nadine through a maze of questions she could barely focus enough to answer. No, Pearl hadn't fallen. No signs of illness earlier. She'd been fine at bedtime, perfectly normal. The specialist arrived quickly. Too quickly, making Nadine's heart race faster. Dr. Chen examined Pearl with swift, practiced movements, his face giving nothing away. "Mrs. Kerrigan," he said finally, looking up from Pearl's tiny form on the examination table. "There are some concerning signs of spinal involvement. The lack of muscle response in her extremities could indicate paralysis, but we'll need scans to confirm." The word paralysis hit Nadine like a physical blow. She swayed, gripping the edge of the table. But she was fine just hours ago. How could this happen? "Sometimes these things can develop suddenly," Dr. Chen said, making notes on his tablet. "We'll schedule the imaging, but for now, I want you to take her home and monitor her closely. Watch for any changes in breathing or responsiveness. If anything worsens, bring her back immediately." "That's it?" Nadine stared at him. "Just watch her?" "The scans will tell us more, but right now she's stable. Sometimes these episodes resolve on their own." He handed her a sheet of warning signs to watch for. The earliest appointment I could get for the imaging is tomorrow afternoon. Keep her warm and comfortable until then. The drive home felt even longer than the panicked journey to the hospital. Every bump in the road made Nadine wince, imagining Pearl's fragile spine. The bitter wind had picked up, and the old rental house creaked ominously as they returned. Bauer met them at the door, his tail low but wagging. He sniffed Pearl anxiously as Nadine carried her to the nursery, then followed them like a shadow. "At least you're still normal," Nadine murmured to the dog as she settled Pearl in her crib. But as soon as she stepped back, Bauer did something odd. He planted himself firmly between the crib and the floor vent, his posture alert and tense. The furnace clicked on with a whoosh of air. Bauer's hackles rose, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "Bauer, quiet." Nadine hushed him, not wanting the noise to disturb Pearl. But the dog didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the vent, body rigid with attention. Nadine sank into the rocking chair, exhaustion warring with worry. She couldn't sleep, didn't want to sleep, but her body felt heavy with fatigue. The house settled around them with unfamiliar sounds. The furnace cycled off and on as the temperature dropped outside, and each time it did, she noticed Pearl's breathing seemed to grow more shallow. Bauer remained at his self-appointed post, growling softly whenever the heat came on. It was unlike him. He'd been such a quiet, well-behaved dog since John had brought him home as a puppy, one of the last things he'd done before. Nadine pushed the thought away. She couldn't handle grief on top of terror right now. Instead, she focused on Bauer's strange behavior. John had been training him as a scent-alert dog for low-oxygen environments before the accident. He'd never finished the certification, but the training had stuck. The furnace kicked on again. Bauer's growl deepened, and Pearl's tiny chest seemed to work harder for each breath. Something cold settled in Nadine's stomach. She stood and lifted Pearl from the crib, moving her to the far side of the room. Bauer immediately followed, pressing his nose against the baseboard where another vent was located. "What is it, boy?" Nadine whispered. "What are you trying to tell me?" The dog's only response was to maintain his vigilant watch, positioned between Pearl and the vent, as if guarding her from an invisible threat. The house felt different now. Not just unfamiliar, but hostile. Every shadow seemed deeper, every creak more ominous. Nadine pulled the rocking chair closer to Pearl's new position, fighting to keep her eyes open. The pattern was becoming clearer, even if she couldn't explain it. Every time the heat came on, Bauer tensed. Every time the heat came on, Pearl's breathing changed. "I don't understand," she murmured, reaching down to run her fingers through Bauer's fur. The dog leaned against her leg, but didn't relax his guard. The night stretched on, marked by the rhythmic cycling of the furnace and Bauer's constant vigil. Nadine felt trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake from, watching her daughter's shallow breaths and clinging to the strange comfort of her dog's unexplained behavior. At least Bauer seemed to know what he was doing, even if she didn't. As dawn began to lighten the windows, Nadine's exhausted mind kept circling back to one thought. This house, which had seemed like such a blessing when she'd found it, affordable, accepting of large dogs, available immediately, now felt like it was somehow hurting her daughter. She had no proof, no explanation that would sound sane to anyone else. Just her dog's weird behavior and her own growing sense of wrongness. She held Pearl close, breathing in her baby-sweet scent, and watched Bauer standing guard against whatever invisible threat he sensed. The morning light didn't chase away the fear, but it strengthened her resolve. Something was wrong here, and she would figure out what it was. She had to. Pearl's life might depend on it. Morning light crept through the nursery windows, but it brought no comfort to Nadine. Her back ached from hours spent in the rocking chair, and her eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep. Pearl lay in her crib, breathing steadily now, but the night's terror lingered like a shadow. Nadine forced herself through the motions of a normal day. She warmed a bottle in the kitchen, testing the temperature against her wrist, while Bauer watched from his spot near the doorway. His dark eyes followed her every move, and a soft whine escaped him whenever she stepped too far from Pearl. "I know, boy," she murmured. "I'm worried too." The washing machine hummed in the background, filled with yesterday's baby clothes and burp cloths. Such ordinary sounds, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Nadine's hands trembled as she dialed the hospital to schedule Pearl's scans. "We have an opening next Tuesday at 10:30 in the morning," the receptionist said, her voice cheerfully detached. Nadine glanced at the calendar, calculating. "That's 6 days away? Isn't there anything sooner?" "I'm sorry, that's the earliest available slot. Would you like me to book it?" What choice did she have? "Yes, please." Nadine wrote the appointment time in shaky numbers on the kitchen calendar, then added the doctor's name and phone number beneath it. Bauer's whine grew louder, and his nails clicked against the linoleum as he paced. The furnace had kicked on again. Nadine hurried to check on Pearl, finding her daughter's face a shade paler than before. She adjusted the blanket, her heart racing until the heating cycle ended and Pearl's color slowly returned to normal. A sharp knock at the front door made her jump. Bauer's ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Nadine wasn't expecting anyone, and something about that knock set her nerves on edge. She opened the door to find Weldon Pike on her porch, his bulk filling the doorframe. The landlord's thinning hair was slicked back, and his expensive coat couldn't quite hide his spreading middle. He held a sheet of paper in one manicured hand. "Mrs. Kerrigan," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We need to discuss your living arrangements." Nadine's stomach clenched. "Is there a problem with the rent? I paid on time this month." No, nothing like that." Pike's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "But I'm implementing some new property policies. No pets allowed, effective immediately." He thrust the paper toward her. "You'll need to remove the dog within 48 hours or face eviction." The words hit her like a physical blow. "But that wasn't in the lease. You can't just change the rules." "I can, and I have." Pike's voice hardened. "The lease gives me the right to modify property policies with appropriate notice. This is your notice." Behind her, Bauer pressed against her legs, still growling softly. Pike's eyes flickered to the dog, and his smile turned cold. "That animal looks dangerous. I can't have liability issues on my properties." "Bauer isn't dangerous," Nadine protested. "He's trained. He's gentle with Pearl, and she's calmer when he's near. Please, I can't." 48 hours, Mrs. Kerrigan." Pike took a step back. "Either the dog goes, or you both do. Your choice." He turned and walked away, leaving Nadine clutching the notice with trembling fingers. She closed the door and slid down against it, her legs too weak to hold her up. Bauer immediately nuzzled her face, his warm breath carrying a whiff of kibble. "What am I going to do?" she whispered into his fur. "I can't lose you, too." The day dragged on, each hour marked by the cycling of the furnace and Bauer's constant vigilance. Nadine tried to rest when Pearl slept, but worry kept her mind spinning. She couldn't afford to move again so soon. But the thought of giving up Bauer made her physically ill. He was her last connection to John, the last piece of the life they'd planned together. Night fell, bringing with it a bone-deep exhaustion. Nadine dozed fitfully in the rocking chair, jerking awake at every sound. The digital clock on the dresser clicked over to 3 o'clock in the morning when the furnace rumbled to life. Bauer's reaction was immediate and frantic. He pawed at the baseboard vent, whining urgently. Nadine lurched to her feet, but before she could reach the crib, Pearl went limp again, her little arms falling slack against the mattress. "No, no, no," Nadine chanted, lifting her daughter. Pearl's breathing had grown shallow, her skin taking on that terrifying pallor. Bauer barked once, the first time he'd barked in the house, and grabbed Pearl's favorite blanket in his teeth. With determined tugs, he pulled it away from the vent, dragging it toward the window. Nadine watched him, her mind racing. Could it be that simple? That terrible? She crossed to the window and cranked it open a few inches. Cold January air rushed in, but she hardly felt it. Her attention was fixed on Pearl, counting the seconds until the furnace stopped. Gradually, Pearl's color improved. Her breathing deepened, and her tiny fingers flexed against Nadine's shoulder. The pattern was undeniable now. When the furnace ran, Pearl suffered. When it stopped, she recovered. Nadine sank to the floor, keeping Pearl close. Bauer settled beside them, his body warm against her hip. She ran one hand over his head, grateful for his instincts, his warning, his presence. "Good boy," she whispered. "Such a good, smart boy." She sat there for hours, tracking Pearl's responses, building a mental log of evidence. The furnace cycled on. Pearl weakened. The furnace stopped. Pearl improved. Each episode strengthened her suspicion that something was terribly wrong with the heating system, something that was slowly poisoning her baby. But suspicion wasn't proof, and she knew no one would take the word of a grieving widow about her dog's behavior. She needed help, someone who would listen, someone who could verify what was happening. But who? The hospital had dismissed her concerns, and Pike clearly didn't care about his tenants' welfare. Dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of gray. Nadine watched it lighten through the cracked window, her arms aching from holding Pearl, her mind heavy with fear and determination. She couldn't fight this alone, but she wouldn't give up. She couldn't. Her daughter's life depended on finding the truth, and finding it soon. The morning light had barely touched the windows when a knock at the door startled Nadine from her exhausted vigil. Bauer's ears perked up, but he didn't leave his post by Pearl's bassinet. "Mrs. Kerrigan?" A deep voice called through the door. "This is Calder Boone from Emergency Services. Your neighbor called in concerned about you and your baby." Nadine struggled to her feet, muscles stiff from the long night on the floor. Through the peephole, she saw a tall man in a paramedic's uniform, his badge clearly visible. "Just a moment," she called, voice rough from lack of sleep. She opened the door, clutching Pearl close. Calder Boone's presence filled the doorway, but his expression was gentle. "Ma'am, we received a wellness check request. Your lights were on all night, and Mrs. Henderson next door heard crying." "I'm sorry to worry anyone," Nadine said. "It's been a rough couple of days. Pearl's been—" She trailed off, unsure how to explain. Calder's blue eyes took in the scene, the open window letting in January cold, the protective German shepherd by the bassinet, the obvious exhaustion in Nadine's face. He stepped inside, and something in his expression changed. "Mind if I take a look around?" he asked, his nose twitching slightly. "There's an odd smell in here." "You can smell it too?" Relief flooded through Nadine. "I thought I was imagining things." Calder moved through the room, pausing near where Bauer kept his vigil. "Sort of metallic, right? Like pennies or old pipes." He knelt down by the vent, and Bauer's tail wagged once in acknowledgement. "Your dog seems pretty focused on this vent," Calder observed. "That's Bauer. He won't leave it alone, especially when the furnace runs." Nadine shifted Pearl to her other shoulder. Every time it kicks on, Pearl gets worse. She goes limp, her breathing gets shallow. Worse how? Calder stood, his expression turning serious. It's the furnace, Nadine said, the words tumbling out. I know it sounds crazy, but there's a pattern. When it runs, she gets sick. When it's off, she improves. Bauer knew first. He's been trying to tell me. Calder nodded slowly. That's not crazy at all. In fact, it sounds like possible carbon monoxide exposure. Dogs can often detect it before humans can. He glanced at Bauer with newfound respect. Was he trained for scent work? My husband was training him before. Nadine swallowed hard. Before he passed, for low-oxygen environments. That explains a lot. Calder pulled out his phone. Look, I can call this in, get an official inspection, but I want to be honest with you. These things can take time. Landlords often have their own approved inspectors, and the results aren't always reliable. As if summoned by the word landlord, heavy footsteps thundered up the porch steps. The door burst open, and Weldon Pike stormed in, his face red with anger. What's this I hear about complaints? He demanded, waving a paper in his hand. I've got a signed inspection report right here. Everything's up to code. Bauer's growl filled the room, low and warning. Pike shot the dog a venomous look. I thought I told you that animal had to go, he snapped at Nadine. And now you're causing trouble, spreading lies about my property? Mr. Pike, Calder stepped forward, his calm voice carrying authority. I'm here, conducting a wellness check. If you'd like to discuss this outside. This is my property, Pike cut him off, and I've got proof right here that all systems are functioning properly. He thrust the inspection paper at them. Signed last week by a licensed professional. Nadine felt her throat tighten as she looked at the document. The inspection date was indeed recent, but something about it felt wrong. The signature was too neat, too precise. A piece of paper doesn't change what's happening, she said, finding strength in her desperation. My baby gets sick every time your furnace runs. Bauer knows it's dangerous. He's been trained for this. Oh, now we're taking medical advice from dogs? Pike sneered. Listen here, Mrs. Kerrigan. You're already on thin ice with that animal. Keep pushing this nonsense, and you'll find yourself looking for a new place to live. That would be illegal retaliation, Mr. Pike, Calder interrupted, his voice steel-wrapped in politeness. And I'm documenting this entire conversation. Pike's face darkened. You have no authority here. This is private property. I'm a first responder conducting a wellness check, Calder replied evenly, and I'm seeing several concerning indicators that warrant further investigation. The standoff stretched for a long moment before Pike backed toward the door. Fine. Investigate all you want, but that dog better be gone by tomorrow, or you'll all be out on the street. He slammed the door behind him, making Pearl startle and whimper. Nadine bounced her gently, trying to calm her own racing heart. I can't lose this place, she whispered, but I can't give up Bauer. He's the only one who knew something was wrong. You won't have to, Calder said firmly. I'm going to help you document everything. I'll be back in an hour with a carbon monoxide detector and some forms for recording all of Pearl's symptoms and the furnace cycles. He pulled out a business card and wrote his cell number on the back. Call me immediately if anything changes. And Mrs. Kerrigan? He met her eyes. You're not alone in this. That dog of yours is a hero, and we're going to prove it. After Calder left, Nadine sank into the rocking chair, emotionally drained. Bauer patted over and rested his head on her knee, his eyes never leaving the vent. She scratched behind his ears, remembering John's proud smile when he'd brought the puppy home. You're still protecting us, she murmured, just like he trained you to do. The furnace hummed to life again, and Bauer's muscles tensed. Nadine held Pearl closer, watching her daughter's face for any change. They couldn't go on like this much longer. Something had to give, and soon. True to his word, Calder returned within the hour, carrying a black equipment case and several manila folders. His face was set with determination as Nadine let him in. "Got everything we need," he said, pulling out a compact digital device. "This is a professional-grade carbon monoxide detector. Had it in my truck from my last shift." "You didn't have to," Nadine started. "Yes, I did," he replied firmly. "When it comes to babies and possible CO exposure, there's no waiting around for official channels." Bauer watched intently as Calder set up the detector near the floor vent, his tail twitching with nervous energy. Pearl dozed in her bassinet, her breathing steady for now since the furnace wasn't running. "How long between cycles?" Calder asked, checking the detector's display. "About 45 minutes, Nadine answered. "It just shut off 10 minutes ago." Calder nodded, pulling out his phone. "Perfect. We'll record everything. The detector readings, Pearl's condition, and Bauer's behavior. Documentation is crucial here." They didn't have to wait long. Within 30 minutes, the furnace rumbled to life. The effect was almost immediate. The detector's display, which had been showing near zero readings, began to climb. First to 10 parts per million, then 20, 30, climbing higher with each passing minute. "Oh my God," Nadine whispered, watching the numbers rise. Bauer's reaction was explosive. He barked once, sharp and urgent, then moved to Pearl's bassinet. His nose worked frantically along the bottom edge where the warm air was drifting up from the vent. Then, with surprising gentleness for his size, he pressed his body against the side of the bassinet. "What's he doing?" Calder asked, filming with his phone. "Just watch," Nadine said, her voice tight. Bauer pushed again, more insistently this time. The bassinet moved a few inches across the floor, away from the vent. When it didn't go far enough for his liking, he repeated the motion, physically herding the bassinet and its precious cargo toward the far wall. "That's incredible," Calder breathed, making sure to capture every moment. "He's literally moving her out of danger." The detector's display now showed 65 parts per million and was still climbing. Pearl's little hands, which had been moving slightly, went still. Her breathing grew more shallow. "This is exactly what happens every time," Nadine said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "She gets limp, barely responsive." She moved to pick up Pearl, but Calder held up a hand. "Wait, just another minute. We need to document the full cycle. I know it's hard, but she'll be okay. These levels are dangerous long-term, but not immediately lethal, and Bauer's already moved her to safer air." Nadine nodded, though every maternal instinct screamed to grab her baby and run. She watched the numbers peak at 78 parts per million before slowly beginning to drop as the furnace cycled off. "This explains everything," Calder said, checking Pearl's vital signs with gentle efficiency. "Carbon monoxide poisoning can absolutely mimic paralysis, especially in infants. Their systems are so sensitive. When CO binds to hemoglobin, it prevents oxygen from reaching the muscles and brain. That's why she goes limp." "So she's not actually paralyzed?" Nadine's voice cracked with hope and horror simultaneously. "I strongly doubt it. This is hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. The good news is it's reversible if caught in time. The bad news is it could have been fatal if Bauer hadn't alerted you to the danger." Nadine sank into the rocking chair, overwhelmed by the implications. Weldon's inspection report was either faked or done by someone who's criminally incompetent, Calder finished grimly. "Either way, we've got him. This is more than negligence. It's endangerment." He pulled out one of the manila folders. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we document everything. The CO readings, Pearl's symptoms, timestamps, Bauer's behavior. Then we file an emergency complaint with the housing authority. I've got the forms right here." "What about Pearl? Should I take her to the hospital?" "Yes, but not the ER this time. I'll call ahead to Dr. Martinez. She specializes in pediatric respiratory issues. She can start Pearl on proper oxygen protocols and document the CO exposure properly." Bauer, having successfully moved the bassinet, returned to Nadine's side. She buried her fingers in his fur, finally letting the tears fall. "You knew all along, didn't you, boy? You were trying to tell us." "Dogs can detect carbon monoxide at levels well below what humans can sense," Calder explained, still taking notes. And with his special training, even incomplete, he was perfectly equipped to recognize the danger. The fact that he consistently moved Pearl away from the source probably saved her life. "But what do we do about the furnace? We can't stay here with it running, but it's freezing outside." "You're not staying here another night," Calder said firmly. "The housing authority will shut off the gas immediately when they see these readings, and I've got a spare room with electric heat. You, Pearl, and Bauer are welcome to stay there until this gets sorted out." "I couldn't impose—" "It's not an imposition. It's what neighbors do." He smiled slightly. "Besides, my wife would kill me if I let a baby stay in a house with carbon monoxide leaks." Nadine looked around the small rental house, the first place she'd lived after John's death, where she'd tried so hard to build a new normal for herself and Pearl. "Weldon will fight this. He'll say we tampered with the detector or something." "Let him try." Calder held up his phone. "We've got irrefutable evidence. Professional equipment readings, medical documentation of Pearl's symptoms matching CO exposure patterns, and video of a trained service dog responding to the threat. No judge in their right mind would ignore this." He began packing up the detector, his movements precise and practiced. "The most important thing now is getting Pearl proper treatment. Once we know she's stable, we can fight Weldon on every front: housing authority, health department, and, if necessary, criminal charges." Nadine stood up, newfound strength flowing through her. This wasn't just about a rental dispute anymore. This was about justice, about protecting not just Pearl, but potentially other families from Weldon's negligence. And she wasn't facing it alone. She looked at Bauer, still standing guard by Pearl's bassinet, then at Calder methodically organizing their evidence. For the first time since John's death, she felt the weight of responsibility sharing itself across strong shoulders. Sometimes help came in unexpected forms: a neighbor's dedication, a dog's unwavering instincts, the simple truth revealed by numbers on a digital display. "Okay," she said, picking up Pearl while Bauer pressed close to her leg. "Let's do this. All of it." Time became a blur of urgent activity. Nadine sat in Dr. Martinez's office, watching as the pediatrician examined Pearl under bright lights. The baby's color had improved noticeably just from being away from the house for an hour. "The oxygen saturation is already climbing," Dr. Martinez noted, making careful entries in Pearl's chart. "This absolutely confirms what you suspected. The symptoms match carbon monoxide exposure perfectly. The lethargy, the muscle weakness, the cyclic nature of the episodes correlating with furnace use." Nadine clutched the medical documents in trembling hands. "Will there be any lasting damage?" "Fortunately, no. You caught this early enough, thanks to your dog's warning signs. I'm documenting everything: the initial presentation that was mistaken for paralysis, the oxygen response, and my professional opinion about the cause. This will be crucial for your case." Back at Calder's house, they spread papers across his kitchen table. The warm glow of electric baseboard heaters felt like a luxury after the toxic furnace. Bauer lay at Nadine's feet while Pearl napped in a borrowed portable crib. "Okay," Calder said, clicking his pen. "We need to create an airtight timeline. When did the symptoms first appear? When did Bauer start alerting? Document everything, no matter how small." Nadine described each episode in detail while Calder took meticulous notes. "The first time was 3 nights ago, around 11:15 at night. The furnace kicked on, and within minutes, Pearl went limp. They worked methodically, building their case. Calder showed her how to use her phone to record video evidence properly. Clear shots of the detector readings, Bauer's protective behavior, timestamps clearly visible. "Make sure you get multiple angles," he advised, "and narrate what's happening. The more documentation, the better." A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Sarah Chen from 2 doors down at Nadine's rental house. "I heard what happened," she said, "and I think I can help. I've been getting terrible headaches whenever my heat runs. I thought it was just stress, but now—" "Would you be willing to make a statement?" Calder asked, already reaching for a fresh form. Sarah nodded. "Whatever you need. This isn't right what Weldon's doing." They were just finishing Sarah's statement when Nadine's phone rang. It was another neighbor, panic in her voice. "Weldon's at your house with a locksmith. They're doing something to the basement door." Nadine and Calder rushed over. Weldon stood smugly beside a newly installed padlock, an official-looking notice taped to the door. "Gas service temporarily suspended for necessary system maintenance," he read aloud with exaggerated concern. "Can't be too careful with safety now, can we?" "This is retaliation," Nadine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Just being proactive about tenant safety," Weldon smiled coldly. "Oh, and speaking of safety," he held up his phone, showing an animal control complaint form. "Seems there's been a report about an aggressive German shepherd on the property, against lease terms, you know." Bauer pressed against Nadine's leg, the picture of calm control. "He's not aggressive. He's a trained service dog who detected a threat to my baby's life. Removing him would put Pearl at risk." "Well, that's for animal control to decide, isn't it?" Weldon's smirk widened. "They'll be by tomorrow morning. I'd hate to see anything unfortunate happen." After he left, Calder helped Nadine set up electric space heaters he'd brought over. They cracked windows strategically, creating safe air circulation. "We'll expedite the inspection," he promised. "First thing tomorrow, I've got contacts in the housing department who owe me favors." They worked late into the night, assembling their evidence packet. Medical records, detector readings, neighbor statements, video documentation, and a detailed timeline of events. Nadine's hand shook as she signed the emergency complaint forms. "What if they try to take Bauer?" she whispered. "They won't," Calder assured her. "Look at this evidence. He's not a threat. He's a hero. And tomorrow morning we'll prove it." As if understanding, Bauer rested his head on Nadine's knee, his eyes never leaving Pearl's sleeping form. Outside, the night grew colder, but inside, determination burned warm and bright. They had truth on their side, documented in black and white, in digital readings and medical charts, in the loyal heart of a dog who refused to let harm come to his tiny charge. Dawn would bring its own challenges, but they were ready. The evidence was assembled, the complaint filed, and most importantly, Pearl was safe, breathing easily under Bauer's watchful eye. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The packet sat ready on Calder's table, detector footage showing clear spikes in carbon monoxide levels, Sarah's signed statement about her headaches, hospital records documenting Pearl's recovery away from the contaminated air, and multiple videos of Bauer's protective actions. Every piece of evidence told the same story, one of negligence, danger, and a dog's life-saving instincts. Nadine checked, her phone one last time, confirming the housing inspector's early morning appointment. Then she settled onto the couch, Pearl in her arms, Bauer at her feet, watching the minutes tick toward dawn and whatever it might bring. Nadine stood in her garage, staring at the dusty red toolbox she hadn't touched since James died. Her hands trembled as she lifted the heavy lid. The familiar scent of metal and oil brought tears to her eyes. It smelled just like him. "I know there has to be something here," she whispered, carefully lifting out each wrench and screwdriver. James had been so organized, labeling everything. At the bottom, tucked beneath a folder of old receipts, she found a small black flash drive with Bauer Training written in James's neat handwriting. Her heart pounding, Nadine rushed inside to her laptop. Calder looked up from where he sat, reviewing their documentation. Found something? Maybe. She plugged in the drive with shaking fingers. A folder opened, revealing dozens of video files, all dated from 6 to 8 months ago. She clicked the first one. The screen filled with James's face, so alive it took her breath away. Day 1 with Bauer, starting scent detection training. His voice rang clear through the speakers. The camera panned to show a younger Bauer, all ears and paws, sitting alertly beside a training dummy. We're focusing on low oxygen environments and gas detection, James continued. Military's always looking for more sophisticated alert systems, and German Shepherds have the perfect nose for it. Video after video showed Bauer's progress, learning to detect subtle changes in air quality, practicing alert behaviors, working with test equipment. In the final clips, James was teaching him specific responses, pawing at vents, moving people away from danger zones, maintaining protective positions. He never finished certification, Nadine whispered, remembering. James died before. But he finished the training, Calder said firmly. Look at these timestamps, 4 months of intensive work. That's why he's been so focused on the vents, why he keeps moving Pearl's crib. He's not just being protective, he's doing exactly what he was trained to do. Nadine's printer hummed as she captured keyframes. Bauer alerting to test gases, demonstrating the same behaviors they'd seen him use with Pearl. Each image had clear metadata showing dates and times. This changes everything, Calder said, helping her organize the new evidence. Weldon can't dismiss this as an overprotective pet or random behavior. Bauer is a trained detection asset who's been consistently alerting to a real threat. They worked late into the night, aligning the training footage with their existing documentation. The medical notes showing Pearl's symptoms matched perfectly with what they now knew about Bauer's training focus. The carbon monoxide detector logs validated every alert he'd given. Look at this. Nadine pointed to a sequence of images. The way he pressed against Pearl's bassinet yesterday? It's identical to how James trained him to move people away from contaminated areas. He's not just reacting. He's following his training protocol step by step. The realization hit her hard. All this time, James had left her more than just a companion. He'd given her a guardian, specially prepared for exactly this kind of threat. Tears slid down her cheeks as she watched Bauer, now curled protectively near Pearl's makeshift bed on the couch, his chin resting on her blanket. His bright eyes met hers steadily, alert and ready. He wasn't just waiting for comfort or attention. He was waiting for orders, prepared to do the job he'd been trained for. "Good boy," she whispered. "Such a good boy." They set everything up for the dawn inspection. The evidence file now told a complete story. Medical records showing Pearl's symptoms, detector logs proving carbon monoxide presence, neighbor statements about similar health issues, and now, proof that Bauer's alerts were based on professional training, not coincidence. "We'll start with the training documentation," Calder suggested, organizing the presentation. Establish Bauer's credentials first, then show how his alerts correlate with both the detector readings and Pearl's symptoms. The timeline will be impossible to ignore. Nadine nodded, feeling something new beneath her exhaustion. Direction. Purpose. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't just reacting. She had a plan, evidence, and most importantly, understanding of exactly what Bauer had been trying to tell them all along. The dog lifted his head slightly, ears perked forward, then settled back to his vigilant watch over Pearl. In the soft lamplight, his eyes seemed to hold a wisdom beyond mere animal instinct. He knew his job. He'd always known it. And now, finally, they knew it too. Around them, the night deepened toward dawn. The space heaters hummed, keeping the worst of the winter chill at bay. Pearl slept peacefully, her breathing steady in the clean air from the cracked windows. Their evidence lay ready: medical files, detector logs, training videos, all telling the same urgent story. Come morning, they would have more than just suspicions. They had proof, documentation, and a specially trained dog whose every alert had been right on target. Bauer's eyes stayed bright in the dim light, his posture alert but calm. He wasn't just a pet desperate to protect. He was a trained professional, waiting for his next chance to do exactly what James had prepared him for: saving lives. The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around the house like a heavy blanket. Nadine stood at the window, watching headlights cut through the morning fog. Her heart jumped as a white inspection van pulled up to the curb. "They're here," she called softly to Calder, who was checking the carbon monoxide detector one last time. Bauer lifted his head from his spot near Pearl's makeshift bed on the living room couch, alert but calm. The temporary space heaters hummed quietly, keeping the worst of the winter chill at bay while they waited with the windows cracked. The inspector, a weathered man in his 50s named Thompson, carried a heavy equipment case and a clipboard. He nodded professionally as Nadine led him inside, Calder falling in step beside them. "Ma'am, I understand we're looking at a possible carbon monoxide situation?" Thompson's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "Yes," Nadine said, holding up her phone to record. "We've documented several incidents coinciding with furnace cycles. Our detector shows dangerous spikes, and my infant daughter has had serious symptoms." Thompson noted the temporary setup: Pearl sleeping safely away from the vents, windows cracked, space heaters carefully positioned. His eyes lingered on Bauer, who maintained his protective position near Pearl. "The dog's actually part of this," Calder explained, pulling out the training documentation. "He's specially trained to detect air quality issues. His alerts were our first indication something was wrong." As they talked through the evidence, Thompson reviewed the medical records, detector logs, and training videos. His expression grew increasingly serious. "Let's check the basement," he said finally. The padlock on the basement door showed fresh scratches around the keyhole. Nadine made sure to film these clearly while Thompson examined them. "Tampering?" he asked, making notes. "The landlord locked it yesterday after we reported the problem," Calder explained. "Said it was for repairs, but no one's been here to work on it." Thompson's frown deepened as he used his authority to have the lock removed. The basement air hit them with a metallic tang that made Bauer, who had followed them to the top of the stairs, whine softly. "Let's time this with a furnace cycle," Thompson said, setting up his equipment. "Ms. Kerrigan, keep filming, please." Calder adjusted the thermostat to trigger the system. The ancient furnace groaned to life, its fan kicking in with a rattling sound that seemed louder in the tense atmosphere. Thompson moved methodically, checking readings and taking measurements. The detector in his hand began to beep, its display climbing steadily higher. "There it is," he muttered, moving closer to the unit. His flashlight beam caught something in the metal housing. "Ah, look here." Nadine zoomed her phone camera in as Thompson pointed out a visible crack in the heat exchanger. The metal showed clear signs of age and deterioration. "This is a serious violation," Thompson said, his voice grim. "This unit needs to be shut down immediately." He pulled out a red tag, filling it out with quick, precise movements. "I'm marking it as unsafe for operation pending complete replacement. The crack in the heat exchanger is allowing carbon monoxide to leak into your living space. Nadine's hands shook slightly as she filmed the tag being attached to the unit. It felt surreal. After all the fear and uncertainty, here was concrete proof. The enemy had a name, a cracked heat exchanger, documented by authority. Back upstairs, Thompson added to his report while Nadine called the hospital. "Yes, this is Nadine Kerrigan," she said, pacing near Pearl's sleeping form. "I need to update my daughter's chart. We've just had confirmation of carbon monoxide exposure from a faulty furnace." She listened, taking notes. "Yes, we'll continue the oxygen therapy protocol. Can we schedule follow-up testing for next week?" Calder helped Thompson gather his final readings and photographs. "How long before this unit can be replaced?" "Given the severity, it should be addressed immediately," Thompson replied. "But that's up to the property owner. In the meantime, this unit cannot be operated. That's non-negotiable." Nadine finished her call and joined them. "We'll stay here for now, with the windows open and space heaters. I'm looking for temporary housing, but..." She gestured helplessly at the piles of medical bills on her counter. "Document everything," Thompson advised, handing her his card. "If you need to testify about the conditions or your daughter's symptoms, I'll confirm my findings." Bauer watched the inspector leave, then returned to his post near Pearl. The morning light was growing stronger now, highlighting the makeshift camp they'd created in the living room. Blankets piled on the couch, space heaters positioned safely, windows cracked just enough to ensure fresh air circulation. Calder helped Nadine sort through the new documentation, adding the inspector's findings to their growing file. The red tag on the furnace felt like a small victory, but an important one. They had proof now, official, undeniable proof that their fears were justified. "Still no sign of Weldon," Calder noted, glancing out the window. "But we have evidence of his interference," Nadine replied, reviewing the footage of the basement door's damaged lock. "The tampering, the fake inspection he tried to use, the attempt to remove Bauer, it all shows a pattern." They worked together to organize the next steps, monitoring Pearl's recovery, documenting all medical follow-up, keeping detailed records of their temporary living arrangements. The morning air was cold, but clean. Pearl slept peacefully, her color noticeably better away from the furnace's influence. For the first time in days, Nadine felt something like hope. They had answers now, and official documentation to back them up. The threat was named, tagged, and contained. Pearl would get the treatment she needed. They had a path forward, even if it wasn't an easy one. Bauer shifted slightly, adjusting his position to keep both Pearl and the nearest window in his sight. His training had proven true, his instincts validated by professional inspection. In the strengthening morning light, his watchful presence seemed less desperate and more assured. Guardian, who had done his job well and would continue to do so. The red tag hung in the basement, official proof of what they'd known all along. The inspector's report would be filed by noon. Pearl's medical records would reflect the confirmed exposure, ensuring proper treatment. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a vital first step, one that could no longer be denied or dismissed. The evening settled over the neighborhood like a heavy blanket, streetlights flickering to life one by one. Nadine had left Pearl safely with Mrs. Martinez next door while she ran to print the final documentation at the library. Everything felt closer to resolution. The inspector's report was filed, Pearl's medical records updated, and their temporary housing arrangements were falling into place. She pulled into her driveway, noticing an unfamiliar truck parked half a block away. The shadow it cast seemed longer than it should be, but she brushed off the unease. She just needed to grab her phone charger and head back to Mrs. Martinez's. The house was eerily quiet as she unlocked the door. Bauer had stayed with Pearl, his protective instincts never wavering. She stepped inside, reaching for the light switch, when a sound stopped her cold, the distinctive whoosh of the furnace firing up. "No," she whispered. The carbon monoxide detector suddenly screamed its warning, its red light pulsing in the darkness. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she fumbled for her phone. A loud pop echoed from the basement, followed by an orange glow that shouldn't be there. The air changed, became heavy, electric. Then came the roar. Fire exploded up the basement stairwell like a hungry beast. The pressure wave slammed through the house, rattling windows and knocking pictures from walls. Heat rolled through the hallway in a suffocating wave. Through the chaos, she heard the front door open. "Nadine?" Calder's voice, followed by his heavy footsteps. He'd been checking on them regularly since the inspection. "Calder, the furnace—" She tried to warn him, but another explosion drowned her words. The pressure wave caught him at the top of the basement stairs, throwing him backward. She watched in horror as he tumbled down the steps, disappearing into the smoke-filled darkness below. "Calder!" She started toward the stairs, but the smoke drove her back, thick and acrid. Her eyes burned, tears streaming down her face. The heat was incredible, pushing her away from the basement door like a physical wall. A bark cut through the chaos. Bauer! He must have heard the commotion and broken away from Pearl. The German shepherd bounded through the front door, hackles raised, heading straight for the nursery. His training kicked in, leading him exactly where he needed to be. Nadine pulled her shirt over her mouth, fighting the urge to cough. The smoke was getting thicker, rolling across the ceiling in black waves. Her mind raced. Pearl was safe next door, but Calder was, trapped in the basement. She had to help him. "Weldon!" she heard Calder shout from below, his voice rough with smoke and anger. "Get out of here!" The realization hit her like another blow. Weldon had done this. He'd bypassed the safety shutoff, tried to cover his liability by destroying the evidence. Now the basement was an inferno, and Calder was down there with him. The smoke detector joined the carbon monoxide alarm in a deafening chorus. Through the noise, she heard something else. Breaking glass. Bauer had knocked out the nursery window screen, creating an escape route. Smart dog, she thought, even as she stumbled toward the basement stairs. "Calder?" she called again, dropping to her knees where the air was clearer. The stairwell had become a chimney, drawing the fire upward. The heat pressed against her face like a burning hand. From below came sounds of struggle, cursing, the thud of bodies against walls, Weldon's voice rising in panic. "Let go! I have to—" "You're not going anywhere!" Calder growled, followed by more thumping. The smoke was getting worse. Nadine's lungs burned with every breath. She could barely see the first step through the haze. The fire's roar grew louder, hungry for more. Bauer appeared beside her, fur bristling, eyes reflecting the orange glow. He barked once, sharp and commanding, then grabbed her sleeve with his teeth. The message was clear. Get out, now. But she couldn't leave Calder. The heat was building, the fire spreading. The basement stairs groaned under the strain. Any moment, the whole structure could— a crash from below, then Calder's voice. "Run! Get out!" The stairwell erupted in flames. Nadine scrambled backward as burning debris rained down. Bauer pushed against her legs, herding her toward the front door. The heat was unbearable now, the smoke so thick she could barely find her way. She heard sirens in the distance. Someone must have called 911. But help felt very far away as the fire devoured her home, with Calder still trapped in the basement and Weldon's desperate gambit turned into a potential death trap. Bauer stayed pressed against her legs, guiding her through the smoke-filled hallway. His training had prepared him for this, finding safe paths through dangerous environments. But even his skills might not be enough against the inferno that was growing stronger by the second. The sound of splintering wood filled the air as support beams began to give way. The fire had transformed the basement stairwell into a vertical tunnel of flames, feeding on decades of dry timber and insulation. The very air seemed to burn. Through the chaos, she heard more breaking glass, this time from the basement windows. Was it Calder finding another way out? Or Weldon fleeing the disaster he'd created? The smoke was too thick to see, the noise too overwhelming to tell. Another explosion rocked the house, smaller than the first but still powerful enough to shake the floors. The fire was finding new fuel sources, growing stronger, hungrier. Time was running out. Heat seared through the hallway like a blast from an open furnace. The air itself seemed to burn, thick with smoke and toxic fumes that made every breath a struggle. In the chaos, Bauer's training took over. The German shepherd's teeth found the fabric strap of Pearl's bassinet, his powerful jaws working with desperate precision. Nadine watched through stinging eyes as Bauer began to pull, dragging the bassinet inch by agonizing inch across the floor. The dog's muscles strained beneath his smoke-darkened coat, his determination unwavering. Each tug brought them a tiny bit closer to safety, but the heat was becoming unbearable. She stumbled forward, her shoulder crashing hard against a doorframe. The impact sent waves of pain through her body, but she forced herself to keep moving. Down the smoke-filled hallway, she counted her breaths, like her paramedic training had taught her. 1, 2, 3. Don't panic. 4, 5, 6. Keep moving. A sound from the stairwell caught her attention. Through the thick smoke, she saw Calder emerging on hands and knees. His face was streaked with soot, his movements slow and unsteady. The fall down the stairs had clearly left him dazed, but he was alive. Bauer's sharp, pulsing barks guided him toward them, each sound like a lifeline through the chaos. "The front door!" Calder called out, his voice hoarse from smoke. "It's our best shot." But when they reached it, the door refused to budge. The intense heat had warped the frame, turning their primary escape route into an immovable barrier. Nadine pushed with all her strength, but the door remained stubbornly sealed. The smoke alarms continued their piercing wail, joined by the shrill warning of the carbon monoxide detector. The combined noise was deafening, but it couldn't mask the sound of cracking wood and groaning metal as the house began to give way. Nadine's vision started to narrow, dark spots dancing at the edges. The toxic air was taking its toll. Fighting against her body's growing weakness, she crouched down and braced her shoulder under the bassinet, adding her strength to Bauer's determined pulling. The furnace roared below, pumping more poisonous fumes into the air with each cycle. Every breath became more dangerous than the last. They couldn't stay here, but the front door wouldn't give, and the back door was beyond the worst of the fire. "We need another way out," Calder managed between coughs. His eyes scanned the smoke-filled space, searching for any alternative. "Any windows that aren't blocked?" Bauer barked sharply, still maintaining his grip on the bassinet strap. The dog's training had prepared him for this, finding safe paths through dangerous environments. But even his keen senses were being challenged by the thickening smoke. They backed away from the jammed front door, moving as one desperate unit. Nadine's hand found a wall, using it to guide them as they searched for any escape route, any crack where cold air might slip through, any glimpse of light that could lead them to safety. The heat pressed in from all sides now, making it harder to think, harder to move. But Bauer never stopped pulling, never let go of his precious cargo. His dedication cut through Nadine's growing fog of confusion, keeping her focused on what mattered most: getting out alive. The carbon monoxide detector's reading flashed through smoke-filled air, numbers climbing far beyond safe levels. Each second brought more toxic fumes, more danger. They needed to find an exit, and fast. But everywhere they turned, the fire seemed to be closing in, cutting off their options one by one. Through the thick haze, Nadine caught glimpses of Calder still searching, still fighting despite his injuries. His paramedic training showed in how he stayed low, how he moved with purpose even while battling dizziness from his fall. But they were running out of time, and they all knew it. The house groaned around them, a sound like a wounded animal. Somewhere below, the compromised furnace continued its deadly work, pumping more poison into the air. The heat grew more intense with each passing moment, making every breath a battle between survival and surrender. Bauer's barks took on a new urgency, punctuating the chaos of alarms and crackling flames. The German Shepherd's training had prepared him for this nightmare, but even he was showing signs of strain. Still, he never released his grip on the bassinet, never stopped trying to pull them toward safety. The smoke swirled and danced in the emergency light's glow, creating ghostly patterns that made navigation even more challenging. Each step had to be careful, deliberate. One wrong move could send them stumbling into the fire's path. Nadine's lungs burned with every breath, her eyes streaming from the acrid smoke. But she kept her shoulder braced under the bassinet, working in sync with Bauer's steady pulling. They moved like a strange, desperate parade through the burning hallway, dog and humans united in their fight for survival. The front door's failure had cost them precious time, and now the fire was spreading faster, eating through walls and ceiling. The house's old wood offered perfect fuel, turning their home into a maze of flame and shadow. Yet they kept searching, kept moving, refusing to give up while any chance of escape remained. The thick smoke had become a crushing weight, pressing down on Nadine's chest with each desperate breath. Her legs buckled as she reached the stairwell threshold, and she collapsed to her knees, her body racked with violent coughs. Dark soot speckled with crimson sprayed from her lips, a terrifying sign of how the toxic air had already damaged her lungs. Through watering eyes, she watched Bauer's silhouette move through the smoke. The German Shepherd's pattern of barking suddenly shifted. 2 sharp barks, followed by a deliberate pause, then 2 more barks. The sequence repeated, cutting through the chaos of fire alarms and the roaring furnace below. Calder's head snapped up at the sound, recognition flooding his smoke-streaked face. "That's a signal," he called out hoarsely. 2-2 pattern. That's what your husband trained him for, isn't it? Nadine nodded weakly, another cough tearing through her chest. "Found and trapped," she managed to gasp out. "Jason taught him, when they were working on search and rescue." The paramedic's eyes darted around the smoke-filled space, following Bauer's insistent barking. His firefighter training kicked in, mentally mapping the old house's layout. Suddenly, his expression changed. "The coal chute," he said. "These old houses. They all had them. Should be right." He moved purposefully toward a section of wall, hands running along the aged plaster until they found what they were looking for. A rusted metal hatch, long forgotten and painted over, was set into the wall at an angle. Without hesitation, Calder threw his shoulder against it. The impact sent pain shooting through his already bruised body, but he rammed it again. And again. The ancient hinges protested with an ear-splitting shriek. One more powerful thrust, and the hatch finally gave way. Cold January air rushed in through the opening, cutting through the thick smoke like a knife. The sudden draft created swirling patterns in the toxic haze, but the blast of fresh air was like pure life itself. Bauer didn't waste a second. The German Shepherd immediately began nosing the bassinet toward the chute. understanding instinctively that they needed to stay low where the air was clearest. Pearl lay quietly in her makeshift escape pod, her tiny face pale in the emergency lights. Calder positioned himself at the chute's entrance, grabbing the front edge of the bassinet. "It's going to be tight," he warned, his voice rough from smoke exposure. "But it's wide enough. We'll have to guide it down carefully." Nadine forced herself to her feet, ignoring the burning in her lungs and the way the room seemed to spin around her. She placed her hands on the back of the bassinet, ready to push. The metal chute was barely wider than the baby carrier, its surface rough with decades of rust and disuse. Together they began the delicate process of maneuvering the bassinet into the narrow passage. The angle was steep, but not completely vertical, a small mercy that made their task possible, if not easy. Calder went first, sliding backward while controlling the bassinet's descent. Every movement had to be precise. One slip could be disastrous. Bauer stayed close, his body pressing against Nadine's legs as she guided the bassinet from above. The dog's presence was both reassuring and practical, his training keeping him exactly where he needed to be, ready to help at a moment's notice. The chute's rough surface caught and scraped at their hands, tearing skin and drawing blood, but none of them faltered. Every inch gained was a victory, every scrape and scratch worth the price of survival. The cold air flowing up through the chute helped clear their heads, even as it chilled them to the bone. When the bassinet was halfway through, Bauer began his own descent. The German shepherd's fur caught and pulled against the rusted metal, but he squirmed through without a sound of complaint. His training held firm. The mission came first. Discomfort was irrelevant. Nadine followed last, her lungs screaming in protest as she contorted herself to fit through the narrow opening. The rough metal caught at her clothes, scratched her exposed skin, but she pushed onward. Above her, the fire's glow painted the smoke orange and red, a reminder of the death they were leaving behind. The descent seemed to last forever, though it could only have been moments. Then, suddenly, Calder disappeared from view. There was a soft thump, followed by the sound of something giving way beneath them. The last few feet passed in a blur as they all tumbled out into the night air. They landed in a deep snowbank, the shock of cold stealing what little breath they had left. The bassinet tipped sideways as it hit the snow, but Calder's quick hands steadied it before it could overturn. For a moment, everything was still except for their ragged breathing and the muffled roar of the fire above. Then Pearl drew in a sharp breath and screamed. It was the most beautiful sound Nadine had ever heard. Her baby's cry cut through the night air, strong and alive and angry at the world. Tears froze on Nadine's cheeks as she reached for her daughter, hands shaking as she checked for injuries. Bauer shook himself, sending snow flying from his smoke-darkened fur, then pressed close to the bassinet. His tail wagged slightly. Mission accomplished. Package delivered safely. In the distance, sirens began to wail, growing louder as they approached their street. Help was coming, though they'd managed to save themselves. The cold bit deep into their smoke-heated skin, but none of them moved to seek shelter. They stayed there in the snow, Pearl's cries mixing with the approaching sirens, each breath of clean air a gift they'd nearly lost. The old coal chute gaped above them like a wound in the wall, black smoke now pouring from its mouth into the star-filled January sky. The night erupted into organized chaos as fire trucks roared onto the street, their red and white emergency lights painting the snow in alternating colors. Firefighters poured from the vehicles, moving with practiced efficiency as they assessed the situation. The old house loomed behind them, smoke still seeping from every crack and crevice. Paramedics rushed forward with their equipment, making straight for Pearl in her snow-dusted bassinet. Nadine hovered close, her throat raw from smoke, watching as they gently lifted her daughter onto a backboard. The oxygen mask they placed over Pearl's tiny face seemed enormous, but within moments, the baby's color began to improve. Oxygen saturation climbing steadily, one paramedic called out, studying the monitor clipped to Pearl's finger. Up to 85%, 90, 93%. She's responding beautifully to the clean air. Nadine sagged with relief, feeling Bauer press against her legs. The German shepherd's fur was still matted with soot, but his eyes remained alert, watching every movement around his charge. Despite his own ordeal, he maintained his protective stance. Calder, though coughing and unsteady, was already pulling out his phone. "Here," he said, showing the screen to a police officer who had approached. "These are the carbon monoxide detector readings from earlier today. The timestamps match the furnace cycles exactly." The officer, her body camera's red light blinking steadily, leaned in to study the footage. Nadine fumbled with her own phone, hands shaking but determined. "I have videos too," she said. "The inspector red-tagged the furnace this morning. It wasn't supposed to be running at all." More emergency vehicles arrived. Police cars, a fire investigation unit, even local news vans drawn by the scanner chatter. The street filled with uniformed personnel and equipment. 2 firefighters emerged from the basement entrance, their faces grim beneath their helmets. "Chief needs to see this," one called out. "Definite tampering with the gas line. Someone bypassed the safety shutoff completely." The fire chief strode over, his reflective gear catching the emergency lights. He descended into the basement with a team of investigators, their powerful flashlights cutting through the lingering smoke. They emerged 15 minutes later, documenting everything with photos and video. "The pattern's clear," the chief announced to the gathering of officers. "Someone deliberately reconnected the gas supply after the red tag was placed. We're looking at criminal negligence at minimum." Nadine watched as they photographed the basement access, the discarded padlock, the scorched walls where the flash fire had bloomed. Every detail was being preserved, every piece of evidence catalogued. The nightmare was becoming a case file, something solid and real that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. A commotion at the edge of the scene drew everyone's attention. Weldon Pike was striding up the sidewalk, his face red with either exertion or anger, carrying a toolbox and what looked like replacement parts. He stopped short when he saw the array of emergency vehicles. "What's all this?" he demanded, trying to push past a police line. "I got a repair to finish." 2 officers intercepted him, their body cameras recording every word and gesture. "Sir, this is an active fire investigation scene. We need you to step back." "Investigation?" Weldon's voice rose. "There's nothing to investigate. Just a minor mechanical issue I'm here to fix." The fire chief approached, his expression stern. "Mr. Pike, I understand you're the property owner. Care to explain why the furnace was running despite being red-tagged this morning?" "That red tag was a mistake," Weldon blustered. "These people," he gestured toward Nadine and Calder, "they caused all this fuss over nothing. I was just fixing what they made worse." The admission hung in the air, captured by multiple body cameras. The officers exchanged glances, and one stepped forward. "Sir, are you saying you attempted repairs after the unit was officially tagged as unsafe?" Weldon seemed to realize his mistake too late. He backpedaled, but the damage was done. "I meant, I was going to wait for proper inspection, of course." "Your toolbox suggests otherwise," the officer noted, nodding to the equipment Weldon still clutched. "And we have clear evidence of tampering with the gas line. Sir, please place the tools on the ground and put your hands where I can see them." As the officers began reading Weldon his rights, investigators continued documenting the scene. They collected the discarded red tag, photographed the tampered safety mechanisms, and gathered statements from neighbors who had witnessed the morning's inspection. Nadine watched it all unfold from beside the ambulance where Pearl was being monitored. Her daughter's oxygen levels had stabilized. Her color returned to normal. Bauer sat at attention, his posture relaxed but vigilant, as if he knew their ordeal was finally ending. Calder joined them, having finished giving his statement. His face was streaked with soot, but his eyes were clear. "They've got him," he said quietly. "Between the videos, the detector logs, and his own admission on camera, there's no way he can talk his way out of this one." The fire investigators emerged from the basement one final time, carrying sealed evidence bags and documentation of the tampered furnace. They spoke briefly with the police, adding their findings to the growing case file. The night air filled with the sound of radio chatter and the rustle of official paperwork. Weldon, now seated in the back of a police car, stared straight ahead as officers continued to photograph and document the scene. His attempt to cover his negligence had backfired spectacularly, caught on multiple cameras and confirmed by his own words. The paramedics were preparing to transport Pearl to the hospital for thorough monitoring, though her vital signs remained strong. As they loaded the bassinet into the ambulance, one turned to Nadine. "You can ride with her, the dog too if you need him. He's clearly part of her care team." Nadine looked at Calder, who nodded encouragingly. "Go," he said. "I'll handle things here and check on you later." As Nadine climbed into the ambulance with Bauer at her heels, she caught one last glimpse of the scene. Emergency lights still painted the snow in red and white. Investigators moved purposefully through the yard, and Weldon sat confined in the police car. His attempts at deception finally exposed by the very documentation he had tried to prevent. The ambulance doors closed, and they pulled away from the chaos. Pearl dozed peacefully under her oxygen mask, her tiny chest rising and falling with easy breaths. Bauer settled on the floor, his mission accomplished but his vigil unwavering. For the first time since that first terrifying night when Pearl went limp, Nadine felt like she could truly breathe again. The aftermath unfolded like a carefully orchestrated dance. In the hospital waiting room, detectives gathered statements while medical staff monitored Pearl's improving oxygen levels. The inspector who had previously approved Weldon's faulty paperwork was promptly suspended, his badge and credentials surrendered pending a full departmental inquiry. "We're taking this very seriously," the chief building inspector assured Nadine. "Every inspection this individual signed off on will be reviewed." At the police station, Weldon Pike was processed on multiple charges: reckless endangerment, criminal negligence, and fraud. His attempt to circumvent the red tag had transformed a civil matter into criminal charges. The booking officer read out each count while Weldon's shoulders slumped further. Nadine's meticulously assembled evidence packet proved invaluable. The detector readings, time-stamped videos of Bauer's warnings, and her late husband's training footage of the German Shepherd's gas detection abilities created an ironclad timeline. The hospital notes documenting Pearl's symptoms and recovery when removed from the contaminated environment completed the picture. Calder remained a steady presence, dividing his time between the hospital and coordinating with investigators. His expertise helped translate technical details into clear testimony. "The evidence speaks for itself," he told Nadine. "You built this case one piece at a time." In Pearl's hospital room, Bauer maintained his vigilant watch despite his singed ear and smoke-roughened coat. The German Shepherd's dedication never wavered, even as nurses came and went. Pearl's oxygen levels continued to improve, her color returning to normal as clean air filled her lungs. As the adrenaline of the crisis faded, Nadine found her hands shaking while reviewing paperwork. The full weight of what they'd nearly lost pressed in, making each breath feel precious. "We really made it," she whispered to Bauer, who responded with a gentle bump of his nose against her palm. Back at the house, Crime scene tape marked off the furnace room. The red tag had been reinstated with additional warnings, multiple signatures, and photographic documentation. What had once seemed like an insurmountable wall of denial and danger had crumbled in the face of persistence and proof. For the first time since that terrifying night in the emergency room, Nadine could see a path forward. Each breath came easier, carrying not just air, but hope. In the weeks that followed, hope bloomed, like early spring flowers through melting snow. Pearl's follow-up scans revealed what Nadine had desperately wished for. There was no spinal damage. The doctors marveled at the infant's recovery as oxygen therapy and clean air worked their gentle magic. Day by day, Pearl's strength returned, her little legs kicking with renewed vigor. The mysterious limp episodes that had terrified Nadine completely disappeared. Through a local victims assistance program, Nadine found a small but sunny apartment in a well-maintained building. The property manager not only welcomed Bauer, but praised the dog's heroic actions after reading about the case in the local paper. The new furnace hummed efficiently, its recent inspection certificate proudly displayed. With Pearl's health stabilizing, Nadine turned her attention to formalizing Bauer's role. The German Shepherd's documented performance during the crisis, combined with her late husband's training videos, provided a strong foundation for medical alert certification. The K9 Training Center was impressed by Bauer's natural abilities and existing scent work. "He's got the foundation already," the head trainer observed. "Your husband knew what he was doing. We'll just fine-tune his skills and get the paperwork in order." Through it all, Calder remained a steady presence in their lives. He never made a fuss about driving them to appointments or helping carry groceries up the stairs. His support came without fanfare or expectation, just quiet dependability that made each day a little easier. Pearl thrived in the clean air of their new home. Her responsive eyes followed Bauer's every movement, lighting up whenever the shepherd came near. Their bond grew stronger each day, the dog's protective instincts now channeled into gentle playtime and constant watchfulness. For the first time since becoming a widow, Nadine felt herself relaxing into a new normal. Crisis management gave way to routine: bottles and naps, training sessions and doctor's visits, evening walks with Calder and Bauer. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was one built on courage. Not the dramatic kind that made headlines, but the quiet sort that showed up every day and kept moving forward. Sunlight streamed through the new apartment's windows, painting warm squares on the freshly carpeted floor. Nadine knelt beside Pearl, her heart drumming with anticipation. Bauer sat perfectly still, his intelligent eyes fixed on the 6-month-old who had grown so much stronger since their ordeal. "Ready, sweetie?" Nadine whispered, positioning Pearl's tiny fingers in Bauer's thick fur. The German Shepherd remained steady as a rock, understanding the importance of his role. Pearl's other hand curled trustingly into her mother's palm. Pearl's first step was shaky, her little legs trembling with the effort. But she held on, determination sparking in her gray eyes. The second step came easier, then a third. Each wobbly movement forward brought fresh tears to Nadine's eyes, happy ones this time, so different from the smoke-stung tears of that terrible night. Pearl's delighted giggle echoed through the room, drowning out the memory of screaming sirens and crackling flames. The sound was pure joy, untainted by fear or pain. Bauer's tail wagged gently, careful not to disturb Pearl's balance as she continued her determined march across the living room floor. The morning mail had brought news that felt like the final piece clicking into place. Weldon Pike's sentencing was complete. The judge had shown no leniency, citing the landlord's willful disregard for human life and attempted cover-up. There would be no loopholes, no early release, No chance for him to endanger other families. The inspector who had rubber-stamped Weldon's false documentation remained suspended, his license permanently revoked. The system that had failed them was slowly being corrected, one consequence at a time. Nadine closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to acknowledge the flash of memory. The coal-blackened basement door, the toxic furnace, the desperate scramble through the chute. But now these images were just that, memories. They no longer held power over her present or her future. The door was sealed in her mind, not in her reality. What they had survived wasn't magic or mere luck. It was the result of truth fought for and uncovered, of her husband's careful training living on through Bauer, of love that stood its ground when bullied and threatened. Their rescue had been built on preparation meeting determination, on a mother's instincts backed by a dog's unwavering loyalty. Pearl took another step, then another, growing more confident with each tiny stride. Bauer moved in perfect sync with her pace, his burned ear a badge of honor from their escape. Nadine matched their rhythm, supporting without controlling, just as she had learned to do throughout their ordeal. This was their new normal, mother, daughter, and heroic shepherd, moving forward together. Each step was a victory, each laugh a celebration of not just survival, but of thriving. They had rebuilt their world on a foundation of truth and trust, stronger for having weathered the storm together. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.